Good morning, everyone. My name is Grace Riley, and I lead Government and Public Relations here at Cutric. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Today, I am joining you from Toronto. We acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So before we get started, I'd like to give a huge thanks to the panel sponsor, HDR.
Together, anything is possible. We believe that the way we work can add meaning and value to the world, that ideas inspire change, that coloring outside the lines can illuminate fresh perspectives, and that small details yield important realizations. Above all, we believe that collaboration is the best way forward. So while we are most well known for delivering architecture and engineering services, for adding beauty and structure to communities through high-performance buildings and smart infrastructure, we provide much more than that. We create an unshakable foundation for progress because our multidisciplinary teams also include the firepower of archaeologists, economists, builders, analysts, artists, and scientists. Our employees, working around the world, push open the doors to what's possible each and every day.
So, for this session, we'll be talking all things return to transit, and in particular, rail station mobility hubs, elevating socio-economic life with improved retail and multimodal rail station design. Airports around the world commonly generate large portions of their revenues from retail activities within their facilities. So why can't rail do the same in Canada? Railway stations can be retail hubs that support social and economic life. This includes designing rail mobility hubs that also support different modes of mobility to support social needs, including electric scooters, autonomous shuttles, conventional buses, and private cars that will have a need for electric charging as well. So people will be able to use the asset of the power grid for other systems such as charging, recuperation energy, energy storage, redundancy system provider, and so much more. Not only can rail generate revenue from the previously mentioned with retail, but it can also increase the value of neighborhoods with high economic effects of business and property prices. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome our two panelists today. We have Marco Kroenke, Director of Business Development Canada at Ricardo Canada. We have also with us today, Michael Sutherland, who's the Director of Urban Solutions at Hatch. So good morning to you both. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
Of course. So to get started, we're going to have some presentations from both Marco and Michael. We're going to kick things off with Marco. And then after both of these presentations, we will go into a Q&A. So make sure to put your questions in the chat. I know I already have a billion, so we're looking forward to the conversation. But let's go with you, Marco. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you, Cutric, for making this Smart Rail conference happen. Even it sounds a little bit like a difficult phrase, elevating socioeconomic life with improved retail and multimodal rail station design. To keep it short, I think it's all about passenger and passenger experience. What we really want is having a good mobility. And I'm happy that we have the floor to do some thoughts on this topic and hopefully a good discussion afterwards then. So I just don't see the right-hand slides. Can you go to the next one? Thank you so much. So you may have seen already the Jewel Changi Airport terminal there, because I believe in the railway business, we can learn and leverage a lot from what the airports of the world have done already in the past. So this is a $1.3 billion, actually it's not a terminal directly, it's a connection of terminals just to attract people, to have a smooth ride from the city to the different terminals, by a nice elevated people mover system connecting from the Mitsubishi Crystal Mover system. They have made it really nice with the highest indoor waterfall, nice green gardens, but obviously they make money out of it. They do have a lot of retail, they have shops, dining outlets, early baggage check-in. So they don't only, trying to make money out of the system, but as well focus on the passenger experience by early check-in of the luggage. So, people can go there, bring the luggage, and then go around to spend their time because they just know in an hour or two, or even come early just to get the experience from this nice terminal complex here. The next one, please. On the other hand, sorry, I guess I took not the best picture of Toronto Union Station, but I know that Michael has really the nice pictures from the Great Hall and from the inside. The point I want to say here is if you ever experience like Via Rail, how it's working in Union stations, how to embark the train is obviously you got your ticket, you may wait there, you may have purchased it in advance, but if you go down there you have to wait again to queue up, typically 20 minutes before. Then you go down to the platforms, it's dark, you got guided, you have a lot of service personnel, you have to know to which coach you go. So I guess there's a lot of improvements to make if we see alternative other stations where we have a much more focus on, what's our feeling when we are at stations. As we know, Toronto is the second busiest railway station in North America with 72 million passengers each year. So really, really busy. And I think with the upcoming program, we will see already many, many improvements there. Next slide, please. So what makes a station smart? So we have to look at the future needs of those hubs. By typically, what we need to do is integration of transport systems, integration of future energy systems, and future scarce resources. So what does it mean? In order to do a smooth and much better connected systems, we have to look at all the interfaces between any kind of transport system that is in and around station. Same with energy systems, whether it's electricity, whether it's other kind of supply systems, and as well all the logistics of goods for the scarce resources. So the picture shows basically integration of these key areas will be key in order to have the basis for a smart station then. Next slide, please. So obviously a multimodal station has to have the integrated transport systems with any kind of rail, commuter, metro, trams, taxi, Ubers, e-scooters, bicycles, whatsoever you can imagine. They have to be integrated, and integrated is probably, not just a bicycle rack of 20, 30 stations somewhere at a corner at a dark space, but needs to be in the planning phase, integrated, needs to be in the digital space integrated so everybody can access it, have an easy way to locate it, go to it, lock it, or purchase things there. Energy systems like charging stations, that's like the larger network of e-scooter, electrical bikes, small cars, whatsoever, the entire network, water, power generation, and waste. We need as well the fully connection. So any kind of communication has to be easy and smooth, all data to be provided, and in principle, Internet of Things. So connecting any little, whether it's a door, whether it's the train, whether it's the passenger information system, has to be connected and make accessible via smart software. in order, and that's the key, in order to increase the passenger experience. It's not about products, bring products to the market, bring consultants to the market. It's about passenger experience. You should remember, that you have been at the Union Station, had a great experience because it was just running smooth and great. Next slide, please. So further readings, there are many, many nice examples, both from the UIC and from Railway Technologies, how to make smart stations smarter. I will provide the presentation. It's good examples in London, St. Pancras Station, and Barcelona and other ones where we can see how it can be done. Next page, please. So I picked a few examples, like in the Netherlands, the Utrecht station, they have directly a bicycle parking garage of 12,000 spaces directly connected to the main station. So it's basically a highway leading into the garage with automatic billing, ticketing, where you store and find your bicycle. You don't have to go outside in order to access then the station. So I think this is a perfect example of how to make it easy of connecting from, going with your bicycle, then further on with a train. The Atocha station in central Madrid is made as well to feel really nice within green garden, green space. You just feel, comfortable and like to enjoy, like to go there, a great hall there as well. But as well, many small examples like Frankfurt, a bus stop, just, make it green to see, fresh air, to have a nice visual impact there. You just feel better than with many little things like this. And final slide, what we do at Ricardo Rail Canada, we support all these elements of around passenger experience, but as well focusing on topics safety. Safety is paramount. We do a lot in digitalization that enables this passenger experience. Focus as well on sustainabilities, and we develop as well a lot of own technologies all together with partners. Thanks a lot, and I'd like to hand over then back to Grace.
Thanks so much, Marco. Really, really interesting. And I could want to flag Atocha station in Madrid is my favorite station. They have little turtles and everything in their garden. It's really fun. So it's always a good time to go there. We'll get more into some questions about some of your aspects of your presentation. But thanks again. And we'll next move on to Michael. Michael, over to you.
Grace, and thanks, Marco. Okay, so I was going to ask to focus on Union Station, and personally, I've been very fortunate to work in and around Union Station, both physically, but also in roles with the province of Ontario, and then I spent a long time at Metrolinx, involved in a number of projects around, and now at Hatch, heavily involved in pieces of infrastructure and network, and a lot of Union Station is very, very important to the growth of the Toronto region. So I'll talk about a quick primer on sort of the history of Union Station, some of its pieces, maybe spark some conversation and questions from the audience and Grace yourself by going through the various elements. And then I'll just quickly fly through a couple of my favorites, international examples that I think have relevance to the arc of growth and evolution of Union Station and the precinct. And I'm gonna talk a lot about not just Union Station, but the precinct of Union Station. That's next slide. So, I mean, Union Station is in many ways, fortunate because of many advantageous circumstances. The railway was built where the waterfront used to be, the lakefront, and then everything south of Union Station is lake fill, basically. It's on Front Street. It's across the street from the Royal Hotel and the financial district, which has grown to become the #2 financial district in North America. So it's incredibly well situated. And actually, I've been involved in a number of conversations over the years, and it's amazing to think that, Union Station is other than maybe Tokyo, you'd be hard pressed to find another station that is so advantageously located. A lot of train stations, because of history, were built slightly further away from their business districts, but Union Station is literally across the street from the center of the action here in Toronto, and it's very well linked to the rest of the transport network. Next slide, please. So if we just, I didn't go all the way back to its construction and opening, but I thought it's worth revisiting. Many people may not remember, but Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, or the owners of the Maple Leafs, actually proposed building a Maple Leaf Gardens on top of Union Station, a la Penn Station in New York City. I think many of the transport commentators would kind of wipe their brow and say, thank goodness we didn't do that, because Union Station otherwise would be condemned to the experience of Penn Station in New York, which is not good. It columns and building structural requirements and systems would have gotten in the way and actually prevented Union Station from becoming what it will ultimately become at the kind of conclusion of the first round of RER development. City of Toronto had an idea to revitalize the station with digging out the concourse, which is what we're now seeing. The York concourse was opened a couple of years ago. The Bay Street concourse was opened in the middle of the pandemic, so many of us probably haven't experienced it. But this was really based on initially a very retail revenue maximizing scheme put forward by the City of Toronto. And it's interesting to think, but only 15 years ago, when the City of Toronto was really focused on this, Union Station was not thought of in terms of its future being as significant as it was, because Metrolinx had not even been created yet. Go Regional Express Rail and the Go Expansion program were not even born, and it was very much a status quo with an incremental growth trajectory for Go Transit. And I think planners and transport commentators alike would probably comment and say that collectively there was the vision of Go Rail being so central in the region's development, and it being a core part of the rapid transit network was really not thought of. And the focus was on subways and light rail. Now then you add on Go Transit developed a new train shed, which is the glass roof that we all know and are beginning to experience a little bit as the old infrastructure peels away and reveals the glass roof. But that glass roof was not designed with, again, the future ambition of the rail network and the reorientation of the movement of platforms and tracks that ideally would be necessary to unlock the full potential of the regional rail system. Then you have, of course, some activity there, and the city was and Waterfront Toronto. Many levels of government were involved in funding and advancing the twinning of the platform project at Union Subway Station. CIBC Square came along, and there was a bus terminal as part of that project, which gave a regional bus terminal of a higher quality directly linked into to Union Station. Again, I worked very closely on that project. Hard to believe that Go Expansion and the vision of electrifying 5 lines of the network and the role of Go was still not crystallized at that point. And then at the back end of the right-hand slide, you have the introduction of Union Pearson Express, which is actually outside, the historic train shed. Again, kind of a tack-on project if you actually dig deeper and think about it, about how that project was developed. But that UPX is symbolic and important because it shows Toronto and the Southern Ontario what frequent rapid regional rail can look like, and it's just a taste of what's to come with the improvements to the Go Rail network. And then lastly, I think the one last piece of unresolved part is how do we get the Queens Quay East streetcar actually advanced? And there's a lot of planning and design work that's going on, and that will happen. It's just the funding has to land, and timelines have to solidify. But I think just given the pressures of the city and growth, that's a great project, and it's inevitable. So lots of pieces, but I think the thing I want to impress on the audience is that a lot of these things were not. They were happened in a strategic sense because there are passionate, capable professionals working on this stuff. But I don't think you could ever point to one master plan that said this is the future of Union Station. And in a way, a lot of it is surprisingly accidental. Next slide. Couple, just to remind us all about the various components of Union Station. You've got the retail concourses now. You have the GO train access and platforms. You have, of course, the GO services. You've got the TTC subway and streetcar station. You've got the GO bus terminal underneath CIBC Square. You've got Union Pearson Express, which has an evolved future ahead of it, given its integration with RER and GO expansion. And then you have the heritage components of the Great Hall, and you could arguably say the front door to Front Street, and the importance of the plaza opposite the Royal York Hotel. So a really, I mean, just a remarkable asset, lots of components, and Marco quite rightly, I mean, highlighted just how many people use the facility. And so these things are only just coming into view in the last couple of years. It's a very exciting time, and there's still so much work to be done. I'll just, next slide, please. Couple of thoughts I think I mentioned on, I mean, I think, you know, a transit hub of the significance of Union Station drives a ton of value. You think about the access to the financial district, the growth in the residential population in the immediate area, the development of the South Core, commercial towers, but also the, again, residential areas immediately around the precinct. I mean, there's a lot of tall buildings around. There's a lot of people that go to work here. But there's a lot of people that live and also play. I mean, you think about the Scotiabank Arena, the multitude of activities to do on the waterfront. I mean, all of the cultural and creative types of attractions that are in the, you know, within a walking distance or a quick transit or bike ride of Union Station. It is really remarkable. And so I think when you think about a station like Union Station, you have to think bigger first. And then if you do the things that Marco was talking about, like make sure that the passenger flow works and it's a really great interchange and connections are easy, the retail and the experience can happen after that, and agencies can do what airports do and drive value. But you can't drive value if you don't drive footfall, and footfall is driven from really excellent transit and getting the station's core function right, which is to move people and bring together many different modes. Next slide, please. Couple of lessons learned. I've just put failing fast. We talk about failing fast in the 21st century a lot. Failing fast is great because you learn a lot, but failing fast with a large transit hub is a bad thing. I love hockey, but building a hockey arena above Union Station would have been a mistake, and that would have been a big fail, I think, because it would have limited a lot of the flexibility you require. If you go to a lot of other transit hubs, very rarely do you see overbuild directly over the immediate rail station. Building over rail lines makes tons of sense where the real estate values support it. But the function and the operational demands and the complexity of a large rail station is very difficult to build over top of. And we'll do a couple of aerial shots and look at some other cities and note that has not happened. Good design, absolutely. And I think, you know, being both agile and doing some strategic planning is definitely worthwhile. And I think Union Station will come out at the end. It probably could have been less expensive and a little bit of a straighter line to get there, but Union Station will be one of the great transport terminals of the world, and it's very exciting. We're very fortunate. I mentioned stakeholder engagement, working with stakeholders, and then really making sure that your top technical talent is involved. These assets are so important to the vitality of whole urban regions. Getting them right is really important. Next slide. So I'll just quickly run through some of my favorites. I'm not going to talk about them, but just to kind of spark some conversation perhaps. So the next one is King's Cross. This one is well known. I mean, this is among urban regeneration and economic development sort of fans. This is one of the best in the world right now. Not just for the transport hub. It's really about Google and Facebook and the Arts College and the regeneration that's happened. I mean, what's happened in King's Cross in 15 years is just remarkable, and it's amazing. And it shows that with vision and foresight and, you know, deep pockets and financing, some really remarkable value can be created, both financial and also for communities. Next slide. I think Liverpool Street Station is another good one to look at in London, because the Broadgate estate wraps around it. I mean, it's hard to look in that picture and actually identify where Liverpool Street Station is, but it is the city of London grows in the direction, and it really envelops Liverpool Street Station. And as a result, Liverpool Street Station is one of the core gateways to great financial capital of the world in London, and it's a good case study as well. Next slide. Tokyo, I couldn't help. I haven't worked on this one. I just experienced it as a tourist, but it's phenomenal, the number of services that use it. But again, no overbuild, lots of building right around it, and there is a really great heritage aspect to Tokyo. So if you ever get there, I encourage you to check it out. And in a way, it reminds me of Union Station in the way that it does have a front door, it does have a front plaza. The plaza is busy, it's multimodal, but they have preserved the heritage while in the back building a very significant multimodal transportation hub, of course, at the heart of an amazing rail system. Next slide. Zurich is worth noting because they have converted a terminus station into a through-running station through multiple phases of new tunneled S-Bahn. And so you can't see the magic of Zurich Station from this image because most of it is underground. But they've done a wonderful job with retail concourses, with connectivity. I mean, this is an important hub for all of Switzerland, and it's the heart of the Swiss rail network, and it is an amazing facility. I was fortunate enough back when we were developing the Go RER program to get a tour of it and get it fully explained in its evolution. And many of the things, even though the engineering solutions are a little different, the core concepts of through running and linking trains and focusing on the passenger and then building a retail experience around what is a core transport facility are really baked into Zurich. So if you ever get a chance to check out Zurich, I highly, highly recommend it. And there is an adjacent office development, which is not visible in that image, but it is a development program, and the Swiss Railways do have a strategic real estate development program, which is worth taking a look at. Next slide. And I couldn't do this presentation without focusing on La Défense in Paris, outside of Paris, just because it is such a great example of regional rail, metro, all coming together, and an amazing global leading economic cluster and district built right around. And this one did have some big visioning and planning. I mean, in the 60s and the 50s, they planned this and they strategized it. There's a great art exhibit at museum in Paris that explains this, and I encourage anybody who's interested in this to take a look. But this is not old Paris. I mean, this is new, the new modern economic heart of France, and they've built a fantastic transport hub that moves lots of people to get there. So then we go back to Union Station on the next slide. And it really positions, I mean, Union Station is, in a way, compared to some of these other facilities I've just talked about, kind of a teenager. Amazing history, but a lot of exciting things still to come. And by looking at the great terminus train stations around the world, I think we can be inspired and help us imagine the trajectory that Union Station is on. I think we'll probably end it there. I've made some points about, just to wrap up, cities. We could talk about COVID. We could talk about, I mean, this is such an important facility that I think I just want to reiterate Marco's point that these are transport facilities first. To get them right enables footfall, which generates the value, which creates the real estate development, which allows you to do the retail and all the other now digital value add services that go along with that, because those services, to do it economically, really relies on scale, which again relies on footfall. And I think the other thing worth highlighting is that if you get these central terminals really done right, it can unlock real estate and value creation strategies elsewhere on the network. There's a focus on suburban secondary nodes, and making them work will only work if you have a really great transport network that's well used, and usually that means you have to have a really great central terminal. Thanks very much. Thanks, and thanks, Kutrick, for hosting such a fantastic session. I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion.
Me too, Michael. Thanks so much for your presentation. Really interesting. I like how you've given examples of really great railway hubs or station hubs across the world. Maybe a question to our audience. I saw someone put in the chat, Washington, D.C. Union Station's another great example of retail revival. So maybe let's ask our audience to put in their favorite mobility hubs in the chat so we can see what other mobility hubs that we're missing from this conversation. So feel free to do that. But maybe I'll kick things off with a question for you, Marco. We've spoken, or both of you have presented lots of important things that passengers value. But in your opinion, Marco, what do passengers value most at stations when they're traveling? If you could pick one.
Yeah, I think we heard as well yesterday from Phil Fairster that like safety and security is paramount. It's like there's no compromise on it, and it's even like not think about it, right? So this is always number one. There's no question about it. Second one, I guess, is the availability. So coming back to the reliability of the system that leads to how smooth a system is in terms of passenger flow. Because if we think about, ourselves, if we travel, how do we do our trip planning? Typically, it's based on experience. How long have you taken last time? But as well, we always consider worst case. How long did I had to queue somewhere? How long did I had to wait somewhere? Typically, at the airport, the security is kind of an unknown factor. And this is what you factor into your trip planning. So that leads to the reliability factor is higher ranked as the total trip time. And this is quite an interesting topic, I believe, because that determines as well how you want and design your station. And that leads again to all the connectivity with the intermodal changeover to different systems. So that's really, I think, important to have a high reliability system as second. And third, then definitely the passenger experience. So if you remember, and we mentioned a few ones here like King's Cross and Madrid and Tokyo, if you just remember it, then it was a success, right? Then you feel good about it. You want to come back. You want to spend time there. So that's, I guess, the third key value then for passenger and passenger experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points. On your point about airports as well, like I often think, if there's not a frequent train going to an airport from where I'm living in downtown Toronto, then I'm probably going to look to other solutions, and that's going to be a taxi or an Uber. And what are the GHG emissions of that, right? So you're right in saying reliability and frequency as well. Like they're so important to get people moving into mass transit. So it's a great point. Michael, for you, what would you say is your key point for passenger value?
Yeah, I agree with Marco and everything. I'm not going to repeat what he said. I think the interesting thing about rail hubs in particular is that I think the demand is a little bit more elastic than in airports. So at airports, I mean, there are some terrible airports out there that have phenomenal retail offers. And the reason why that works is because you're stuck. I mean, you're going to use the airport whether or not it works or not. But in a rail station, Grace, you just said it. If it doesn't work really well, you're going to jump in an Uber or a taxi, which has all kinds of implications. When many, many people make the same decision, it changes the shape of the city. It changes how the city grows. It changes, it's got sustainability implications. It has, road demand and congestion implications. So that's why I think when we compare airports and rail terminals, the rail terminals have to skew more towards being really great transport facilities and recognizing that, and the types of trips that people take through rail terminals too, they're more time sensitive. You don't buffer a rail journey the same way you do an airport trip where you say, oh, I'll get there 2 hours earlier or 90 minutes earlier, whatever it is.
No, you make a good point. And also with your example of Zurich, I'm just thinking back to a few years ago. I took a bus from Munich to Zurich once, and then I had to run to get a train from Zurich to Geneva. And as seeing the high level picture of Zurich, I'm like, oh, that's what the train station looks like. I had no idea because I just ran through it. But I was able to catch my next train because, you know, they made it very easy for me to hop from a bus into a train to catch it on time. So you make a really good point there, Michael. Do want to move on to how we can generate income though. So Marco, how can cities generate income from smart stations? We've talked about retail, but can you dive a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah, I think retail is the classical one that everybody does already, can be improved or is already good in stations to have close by facilities for, you know, bridging the time with dining or just grab a food or coffee or something. But I think there's way more things, specifically in big cities like Toronto or if we think Berlin or whatsoever, as more like a meeting point, a meeting hub, specifically now after, no, it's not after COVID, but it's still in COVID times, where we don't have the need for so much office spaces. If you just think, you know, let's meet for a day, for an hour at an office rented and the main stations, because everybody can go there quite easily there. As well, standard offices, but as well, you can lease out these kind of, whether it's offices, whether it is other elements of infrastructure, because the asset is obviously the infrastructure that the city owns or whomever is the asset manager there. Renting out electricity for like e-bikes, e-scooters, or e-cars that can be, you know, on parking somewhere, you know, close around. Um, Electricity is one point. The other point is data and communication. So there are many startup companies, bigger companies who can make kind of, you know, good money out of data that's could be provided by a station, and not only as well the conventional data about passenger flow, but as well behavior pattern, in combination specifically with Internet of Things, when we combine sensors or other existing data from machines or doors or whatsoever. So I think we can think and discuss much more about additional value streams out of this one. And obviously there's as well secondary elements like the property cost increase then, you know. I think Josip, you mentioned it earlier as well, how much the condos cost around stations, the new stations in Toronto. So is it something that a city just gives away, like to the economy, or does the city like leverage on this one as well? Whether it's directly by taxes or indirectly by whatever the model is, generating some income then for the city by both this growth of business and accommodation living. Yeah, that's, I guess, the key points for generating more value and money out of smart stations.
Yeah, and on house prices as well. Phil Verster mentioned that in his fireside chat yesterday. When a station goes up, house prices increase. So it really is a driving factor for the economic side of things. But you did mention asset managers just in your comments there. Michael, how do you manage a successful mobility hub project with multiple stakeholders involved, like the city, the transit operator, so many others? What's the key to success?
Well, I think you need to dedicate resources. This sounds really basic, but you need to dedicate sufficient resources to tackle the complexity and also bring in the different threads of knowledge that are required, because there's safety, there's, you know, transit operations, there's building maintenance, there's but then there's all the stuff that Marco just mentioned too, and those are all things that you'd be pretty hard pressed to find one person who knows all about that. So I think the thing that where I see agencies struggling is their go-to-market approach, and how do they organize themselves to actually capitalize on this. I think Phil and the team at Metrolinx have done a good job getting a lot better on this. I mean, I used to work at Metrolinx, the growth of the organization getting more sophisticated. I mean, there's still such a long way to go. I think Transport for London and the Graham Craig's team in London is just, I mean, they are maybe the gold standard, at least in the English speaking world, on this topic. And what it leads to is, I mean, they're very good at bundling, the media and the advertising opportunity and the retail and all that kind of stuff together. But what the mountain, eventually what you get to is you have to be sophisticated about real estate. You just cannot get away from it, because the value that these transit hubs creates all ends up in the real estate. And so you're basically trying to scrape off value from footfall with all these different things that Marco just mentioned. But at the end of the day, the big money is in the real estate, and that is a different business from running a transit agency and building linear infrastructure. So you got to involve that really well. And I know I'm personally working on a number of many projects with Metrolinx on that front. I think the thing that also in a fast-growing city like Toronto, the challenge is getting the right temperature on the deals. So Metrolinx really, and it's in everyone's interest to have them go and realize a lot of transit-oriented communities at many stations. And so you want to try and get as much value as you can out of each one. But if you squeeze too hard, you will slow down the enthusiasm for creating all the other nodes. And so how do you maximize node creation while also ensuring that you're getting a fair deal for the government and taxpayers? And I think it's very difficult to regulate, but I think and get just right. But I think you can risk squeezing too hard, to try and get a few dollars here, and at the risk of not turning your attention to going and creating 5 other nodes that might be out there. So it's a fascinating business. It's complicated. It requires knowledge about lots of different stuff. It requires tons of collaboration with professionals who each bring different information and views. But it's really exciting. And I think to be honest, I think the Toronto region is doing a lot of great things that will be held up in North America, at least as leading and lessons learned, and we're learning from other places that have done it well.
Picking up on collaboration that you mentioned, and kind of moving over onto the transit operation side. So when we are looking at these mobility hubs, thinking of the passenger experience, we want to make sure that it is an easy ride or an easy passenger experience going from one mode of transport to the next. So in terms of scheduling, how are organizations currently working together? Do you know how they actually manage schedules to make sure? So if I'm taking a bus or a streetcar into Union Station, and then I want to hop on a GO bus, how are those schedules being organized to make sure that I'm not waiting 20 minutes when I could only have to wait 5? Marco, I don't know if you have any insights on this, or Michael, you can jump in.
Yeah, Michael, maybe you want to start first. I have some limited information only, I guess.
Sure. I think at a high level, what's going on, and Metrolinx is a good example of this, is it's been done on a voluntary basis among agencies. And I think, it's gotten us to a decent place. Canadians are very polite, and, we make it work. But at the end of the day, we have not succeeded in driving total integration. I mean, you could say, yeah, there's some integration and the schedules kind of sync up. But at the end of the day, I think the next sort of frontier that the Toronto region needs to achieve is, and I know this is happening on a pilot basis involving the TTC in some places, but it's so early days and it's just not where we need to be ultimately, is there needs to be financial deals that drive riders and recognize the benefit on a multi-year planning basis, to recognize that, yes, if we provide better synced up schedules and we provide integrated fares, or at least some kind of quasi-integrated fares, that will, over time, people will move with their feet, and we will squeeze more ridership and utilization out of the assets we have. And we're not being commercial about it. And I actually think if we were to get more commercial about this stuff, we would actually drive public benefit as well. But we're starting at this public benefit stakeholder, let's work together, let's be in a committee. but it's not generating the kinds of, firm operational outcomes that I think we ultimately need. And I'd like to see that happen faster.
I agree. And sorry, Marco, just to jump in there, but on the fare aspect as well, like if we take my journey as an example, so I can hop on in 2 minutes from my house onto the Queen's Quay West streetcar to take me to Union Station. But am I going to pay that $3 Presto fare to get to Union when I could probably walk in 20, 30 minutes? Where is that integration of the like a fair or like a good deal for me as a rider to be able to take that streetcar, pay that $3 or hopefully less to then take my train to, I don't know, Mississauga or wherever. And, we're starting to see that, but what is going to drive us or these organizations to be able to do that better and faster? And I don't know if there's case studies out there. I'm sure that there are across the world that does that very well already.
The collective we has not succeeded in putting together the economic and financial analysis. And when I say economics, I'm talking about money to all stakeholders and bringing governments together to get to an optimized system. Because there is the situation you just described, which is where you pay a TTC fare and then you pay a full pop go fare to get to somewhere else on the network. There is absolutely no way that is optimized.
Marco, do you have any insights on this?
Yeah, two things, I guess. On the scheduling, typically what has happened in Germany and other countries as well is to form associations between the different operators. Even they are, separately asset management, separated operating and running their business. They cooperate on an extremely tight way. This incorporates both aspects that we already started to discuss. It's the scheduling, to time it. Whether it's working good or not is always, to be investigated and there. But as well on the ticketing, so that you can either cross-use, just pay once and then have an automatization how the other operator is being paid, or you even have a combined system at all, which is typically as well a really good example of focusing on passenger experience, because nobody wants to buy 2 tickets, right, and then wait for a machine and whatever with coins, cards or working or not working then there. So I think this has been really good examples there. Maybe one of the extremely great example I think is the Oyster card in London, where it is probably Presto looked at this one as well, but I think it's even smarter in terms of recalculating your fare at the end of the trip or even at the end of given time in order to minimize your cost, because once you could have bought let's say a weekly pass would have been cheaper. Your Oyster card is recalculating the fare towards the always lowest possible solution, which is great, because we as passenger appreciate this one. We don't even then again think about it, whether it's $3 or not for this 20 minutes walk. You always know that you get best value out of your transport system then. So I guess these are some example how you can manage the scheduling and ticketing or fare ticketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And then I just see a comment from someone in the audience. Would people really choose to walk for 20 to 30 minutes than pay $3? So, I mean, if you are not in the middle class and you cannot afford a transit easily, then yes, you're probably going to walk that 20, 30 minutes. So I definitely think that it is an important factor to consider when transit and rail is really about moving people, all people, not just the middle and upper class. So I definitely want to flag that. But maybe moving back to hubs, I like your point on the Oyster card, though, because maybe before we go back into the conversation on hubs, being able to tap your credit card or your debit card, that's another option that the Oyster card gives you. So you don't need to have a card. You can just tap your credit card and that will automatically do that calculation that you spoke about, Marco. So it is a really smart thing. Michael, I know you want to jump in here.
I was going to say, Grace, to help you bring it back, I think, the transit networks are built up of, these big capital assets, transit hubs, linear infrastructure. And then on the operation side, how can we not have an optimized revenue system? Like if you were any other business, you would say, well, we have a network of stores and we have a distribution center and we have a digital component. But we haven't really thought about pricing because we haven't really focused on pricing for a long, long time to adjust it, because that's just not that would be impossible. I mean, any business would think, social or not, social enterprise or not, would say, we should really look at our pricing and make sure our pricing is right so that we're getting the best use of all the assets that we've invested in.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Marco, you gave the example of Singapore's Changi Airport. What did they do right in terms of having that hub solution?
Yeah, actually, they had at the beginning really the vision of being the best recognized airport in the world. So obviously, a lot of airports want to do so. A lot of people, airports and countries want to attract people, want to be the global hub from, coming from one country and going somewhere else, but as well want then to retain the people, to bring the people into the, let's say, greater airport then in order to spend money, obviously, but as well being engaged, whether it is with offices, whether it's like cinemas, whether it's then dining, offices. They really want to make this passenger experience happen. So they even spend more like a fun park, Disney park, with this waterfall, having the biggest waterfall indoor in the world. But having as well shows with lightening up this waterfall is really amazing to see, and you just go there visiting it because it's kind of a tourist attraction. So a lot of people out of Singapore cities go there just to this terminal to see it, even if they don't fly out there, right? So I think this vision of becoming the best recognized airport in the world, as high topic, led to the more detailed ones, how to do it, what to do it, always focusing on this passenger experience, worked quite fine there.
Yeah, it's a good point about attractions as well. And I know back in Glasgow, where I'm from, one of the shopping centres has an ice rink. So as a family attraction, it brings people to that place. So thinking about that in these kind of hubs is a really good point. Michael, over to you. What don't you see currently at transit stations, which we really should at this point? What are your thoughts here?
I think a lot of there's great case studies, there's bad case studies. But I think what's interesting is a lot of the transit stations very often don't have a plan, focused on the transit hub itself. And so, I use Union Station as an example, but there's a lot of projects and programs that kind of fit together, and some of there's some ideas that don't always happen, and for good reason. But strategic planning, as basic as it sounds, would actually be a useful thing at more stations, because that would guide, what your capital expansion is, and how do you, think about second and third entrances. I mean, just regional rail stations, sometimes these trains are 300 meters long, which means that if you had an entrance at one end of the station and you had an entrance at the other end of the station, it'd be almost like having two stations because they're so far apart. And just a lot of these infrastructures were built when budgets were tight. Budgets are still tight with infrastructure. So I just think a station-focused strategic plan, it doesn't have to be a big exercise either. It can just be something that's sort of a guiding thing, so that when somebody comes along and says, "Oh, we need another elevator," or we have to do this other refurb project. Well, how does that fit into the plan? And are you optimizing your capital spend at the station to maximize your operations, your safety, your protecting for future real estate development that might be integrated, your retail? I mean, all of that kind of stuff. I think a lot of projects that happen at stations are actually kind of accidental, and they're not strategically synced up.
It's a fair point, and I'll get back to you because I really want to hear more about what your ideal master plan would be at Union Station. And I know that you had said that there's not really been one yet, but maybe before we get into that, Marco, where have you seen smart cities integrate mass transit and shared mobility as well? So bringing all of the aspects together, like scooters, bikes, that sort of thing. Where has that been really prevalent and done successfully across the world?
Yeah, I think cities who look at the, basic needs of the inhabitants, which are housing, mobility. These are two of the key basic needs of people, right? So cities who have been looking at these ones typically are really successful. And probably one good example is Berlin, with really an enormous network of S-Bahn, like the metro system there, subways, trams, and integration as well of these systems, but then expanded on these ones, where, I mean, we may have to see the history of Berlin in this case. There's not only this central point there, because it's quite distributed within many sub areas there, which makes it probably a little bit easier for then multiple hubs. But the point is how to make these hubs lively and attractive for the inhabitants, make the integration easily and fast to just come across the city, because it's like Toronto. You easily can travel 2 hours from one side to the opposite side of the city, and it's just massive. If you have friends over, you always think twice, whom do you meet in the evening, right? And typically you build up your friends more in your neighborhood then. So cities who take care about this easy transition, both for mobility and housing, I think can be really successful. And I believe Berlin is a great example on this one.
Really good point on Berlin. I love Berlin, and getting around the city, it just is made so easy. It's massive, and yet you can still get to places very efficiently. So yeah, great flag. Michael, with your ideal master plan, I don't know if you can give us an idea of what you would recommend goes next to Union. I know that you noted in your presentation that the glass ceiling is currently, it's going to be limiting if we want to expand it more. Would, in your plan, what would you see be next, and would e-scooters be a part of that? I know that they've been declined at council before, but expanding what mobility can go into these hubs is going to be important to keep up with the passenger experience and tie to them.
Sure. It would be inappropriate for me to comment broadly on sort of Union Station. I actually think because they're in the middle of a lot of processes, that it's just, anyways, so I'm not going to go there. I am optimistic largely. And I just want to clarify, my comment was that putting a hockey arena on top of the Union Station would have been limiting. No, the glass shed is not what I was talking about.
Got you. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I misheard then. My apologies.
Yeah. No, but I think, strategic planning at stations, I mean, I think, you look at the catchment areas, you look at where your ridership is coming from, where it could come from, what the future of development is in the area, and then think about how do you make the station as accessible as possible, and your services. So, going back I think on my timeline for Union Station, I mean, it is a bit weird that a lot of things happened and were built before the strategic plan for the rail network came to be around 2015. So in hindsight, you'd probably want to start with the really hard stuff, take a big view on the long-term vision of your rail network and say, okay, given that, now what do we do to maximize all the things that we've been talking about? You mentioned e-scooters. I think stations can do such a better job. I mean, especially in Toronto, and I think there's we've becoming more bicycle friendly, but walking and cycling, it's so basic, but get it right. I mean, Front Street could be such a more comfortable place for people to feel safe and feel like they want to ride. I mean, I've now in COVID I ride 12 months a year. And I don't do it every day, but I do it multiple times per week. I rode to the office today. It was absolutely fantastic. And the reason I do it is because the cycling infrastructure is just good enough, but it could be better. And I think to make I'm relatively able-bodied, I'm relatively fit. I think to make it more attractive for other people who might not be as, into jumping on a bike in December, make the bike lanes more comfortable, make them more segregated. We all know the math about road use and, allocating road space to transit users, to riders, and to walkers versus putting people in cars. We just need to rebalance things and hand more space over to walkers and cyclists. And I think the future, we haven't mentioned the word 15-minute city in this talk, but I feel like indirectly we have. 15-minute cities are such an important concept. And at the heart of a 15-minute city is a rail station, or a good high quality metro station with development around it. But then there's this catchment area that is broader, and the ideal mode for that is cycling. And I think scooters and other things fit into that. But I mean, cycling is such an important mode, and I think we really need to double down on it. We were doing a little bit of work a couple of years ago.
Michael, I'm sorry, we're at time. So
okay, I'll stop.
Love to follow up with that train of thought, but I'm going to have to pause you there. What a wonderful conversation with you both. Thank you so much for taking the time. Maybe very, very quickly, I would just ask each of you to give your one recommendation that you want to leave the audience with today on rail station mobility hubs. So Marco, over to you for your 10-second recommendation.
Okay, passenger safety, passenger flow, and passenger experience.
So all about the passenger. I love it, Marco. Thank you. Michael?
Thank you.
Strategic planning, real estate, services, mobility. And the mobility has to be the core. It has to be the first thing.
I agree. Okay. Thank you so much to you both. Thanks to our audience for joining. And I love the chat. It's been going wild today. So appreciate your comments there. Make sure to join our networking event today at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It was a load of laughs yesterday. So if you want to meet some people like-minded, talking all about rail, join us there. So again, thank you so much. And we'll see you all in the next session. Bye, everybody.